Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. In this tutorial I am going to be talking to you all about loop stitch. So I'm going to show you how to create loop stitch, how to colour change in loop stitch using what I call the extended loop stitch, and also how to cut your loops and brush them at the end to give yourself a really fluffy texture. So if you want to skip ahead to any of those timestamps, then I will put them in here. But to start off with, I'm going to be showing you how to do this version of loop stitch. Now there are a couple of different ways to create loop stitch. The version that I prefer to use creates the loops on the back of the work. So as you are crocheting, the loop forms on this side, and then for your finished piece, you're just going to flip it over and use it here. So to start off with, I have just chained 15 and then done a series of double crochets into those chains. You can create loop stitch in any multiple that you like, because it is essentially one loop forms in one stitch. So there isn't a certain sort of starting chain or anything you need to use. The only thing to be mindful of is how much space you want to create between your loops. So in this example, I have done rows of double crochet or US single crochet in between, but if you did want your loops more spaced out, you could put any stitch rows in between. If you wanted to create more height, you could use trebles or so on. So starting with our rows of double crochet, I'm just going to chain one. And then what I like to do is hold the yarn over my finger like this, and you'll see why in a moment. We're going to go into the stitch below, and then rather than yarning over like we normally would, we're going to yarn under. And then we're not going to pull this strand, we're actually going to pull the loop from behind our finger. So that is going to create the loop for us. Pull up a stitch. And now at this stage, I've got two loops on my hook and a loop round my finger. And you can pull on the tail end to make that loop tighter, or you can pull out to make that loop longer if you want to. So I'm just going to keep all the loops about the length of my finger to make it consistent. We're going to yarn over and pull through. So I'll show you another couple. Insert your hook into the stitch, yarn under, pull up a loop from behind your finger, yarn over and pull through. And I personally like to keep the loop on my finger as I go, but if you wanted to use a pencil or something else to keep the loop length even, then you could. So insert your hook into the stitch, yarn under, grab the loop from behind your finger and pull through, yarn over and pull through both loops. And then you can release your finger out of the loop. So as you can see, our loops are forming here on the back of the work. And so it probably will feel quite fiddly when you first start, just because it's a little bit different holding that loop whilst also pulling through. But as you get into a rhythm, you will see that you're able to pick up speed, and that is why I like to keep the loop on my finger. But obviously depending on what pattern you're working on and how long it requires the loop to be, it might be easier for you to use something else to create the loop, such as a pencil, or to pull out the loop really far if you're making a loop that needs to be very long. So that's it. I'm going to work to the end of the row and then I'll flip it over and show you. So now we've reached the end of the row, I'll flip it over and we can see here are all our loops and how they have formed on the front of the work. So because I was keeping my finger in, they're all quite uniform in length, but obviously it's a loopy stitch, and the majority of projects that use it, the loops are there for sort of texture and movement, so don't worry too much if your loops are all slightly different lengths. And then to work the next row, I'm just going to do a row of double crochet. So we chain one, And the only thing to be mindful of here is to keep all your little loops out of the way as you're working so they don't get caught up in this row of stitches. So to work my double crochet, I'm just inserting, pulling up a loop, yarn over and pulling through. So there we have it. That's one row of double crochet, one row of loop stitch and a second row of double crochet. So on the back it all just looks flat, as you can see, and then on the front we have our loop stitch row. So next up I'm going to show you how to add in another colour and also how to work colour changes in loop stitch, because I have found in my experience that it does require a slightly different stitch, and that is just because when you change from one colour to the other and you are changing colour at the sort of end of the stitch before, as you would in most crochet stitches, when you colour change, it means that the stitch isn't quite as tight, and so what can happen is the loop can distort, or it can end up a slightly different length, or it can even sort of start to pull out. So the stitch that I like to use to change colour in loop stitch is called, or what I'm calling, an extended loop stitch. So I'll show you on this example that we've started here. I'm just going to chain one, and that is a loop stitch row that I'm on now, so I'm going to make 5 loop stitches in this first pink colour. And 5. And at this stage, if you were completing the stitch in pink, you would yarn over and pull through both loops. And ordinarily, if you were colour changing in crochet at this stage, you would yarn over in your new colour and pull through both loops. But as I said, what tends to happen then is that the loop isn't sort of locked in and isn't quite as tight. So what I like to do is yarn over with our first colour and pull through just one loop, because that really helps lock off that loop stitch. And then we're going to bring in our second colour. And pull through both loops in the second colour. So we now have our second colour ready to crochet with. Depending on your pattern, you will either now need to carry this pink yarn underneath your mustard stitches, or you're going to want to move it out of the way if this mustard section is intended to be an intarsia section. I'm going to carry the yarn across just to make it easier for myself to use it again over here. But as I said, whatever your pattern calls for. And we're going to insert into the stitch, and then we're just going to do the same now with our mustard stitches. And as you can see with that pink thread, I'm just letting it sit on the top of my stitches so that I'm working over the top. So you're probably going to want to pull that first stitch a little bit tighter than normal. And so now I want to change back from mustard to pink. I'm going to do the same thing again. I'm going to yarn over once and go through one stitch with the mustard, and then I'm going to bring that yarn to the back of my work so that it's not hanging down on the front here. I'm going to yarn over in the pink, and then I'm going to pull through both loops. And now I'm ready to carry on with my pink stitches. And so now if we turn over, you can see this is what it's looking at on the front of the work with our loop stitches on different colour, and this is what it looks like on the back of the work. So the extended loop stitch does make the stitch ever so slightly higher, so you might want to just work that a little bit tighter when you're changing colour. But as you can see in my sort of example here, it's not noticeable over the whole length of the piece, and I think it looks really effective. I'll just show you what I'm going to do when I'm working back on the double crochet row for this. It's just to work normal double crochets, and you can work your colour changes in the normal way. So we're going to make 5 double crochets in pink. And when you get to the stitch before your colour change and you have 2 loops on your hook, You're just going to yarn over and pull through both of those pink loops. We now have our mustard ready to do our 5 mustard stitches. And again, working in this double crochet stitch, we can just yarn over to colour change as normal and work another 5 stitches. But as I said, depending on your pattern, there will be instructions on the colour changes, when you need to make them, and if you need to be carrying that other colour, or if you just leave it in sections to sort of hang down behind the work. So for the third and final part of this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can cut your loop stitches. And this is something that I really like doing. I'll try and show you in this cushion example, although it is quite a big cushion. You can see here, these were all loop stitches, and I've had this cushion a while, so it is looking a little bit tired maybe. But here's a section where I've just worked in double crochet, but everywhere else I've worked in loop stitches. So if I peel back, you can sort of see my crochet rows. And then at the end, I've cut my loop stitches and given them a little bit of a brush to make this lovely texture. And the loops, the threads don't pull out, they're really secure. And so it's just a really nice way of creating a bit of extra texture in crochet. So all you need to do, it's very technical, is use a pair of scissors. And I quite like to work row by row, just to make it a bit easier for you to see what you're doing and to make sure you catch all of those loops. And I think just for this video, I'm just going to cut half of my loops to show you how I work. So if you feel more comfortable, you can do sort of 1 loop at a time. So I just tend to insert my scissors into the loop and then find the sort of top point and cut. And it's really that easy. This is quite a loopy yarn, but if you wanted to get sort of several loops on your scissors at once, then you can do that to make it easier for yourself. But obviously be careful, especially if your scissors are sharp, because it's a little bit fiddlier. So that's 1 row. So here is how our little sample is looking. We have cut the loops on this side and we've left these loops on this side. And another thing that I quite like to do is you can give this side a little brush now, either with a hairbrush, or I also have a little pet grooming brush. Now this is going to create a bit of fluff because it's breaking up the fibres a little bit, but as you can see, it really does transform the sort of texture and the appearance and creates this amazing texture. So this is a really nice one. I've seen it used when people are making amigurumi teddy bears and different things to create lots of extra fluff and texture, and I've also used it in a couple of my patterns, which I will link below if you want to check them out. So there we are. That's how you cut your loops. So that is 1 cut loop and 1 uncut with a colour change. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this little loop stitch tutorial and that it's inspired you to use loop stitch in a few more of your projects, or perhaps if you're making a pattern and you needed a bit more help and assistance, then this has made things a bit easier for you, especially if you're doing colour changes or if you wanted to cut your loops and create a bit of texture. I use this in a couple of my patterns, in my leopard print clutch, in my fluffy stool, and also in my Burmuda cushion. So as I said, I'll put the links to those below if you wanted to check any of those out. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next week with another crochet video. Bye!